Well, hello there. I'm Papa John, and I love talking about films that other people might not be so keen on. And that brings us today to the Terrifier films and the Art the Clown films. There might be three Terrifier films, but there are four Art the Clown films. And today we're going to talk about them. We're going to rank them. I'm going to show you my ranking, which I just said I was going to do. So let's stop wasting time and let's get going. And first off, my least favorite would have to be the original feature-length Terrifier. And I think as a prototype, as a proof of concept, it's pretty good for that. You know, it's got good technical qualities for this grindhouse slasher, but there are some story things that just personally don't do it for me. So first of all, there's the one that a lot of people seem to not like about this movie, and that's the fact there's not really a main character. And I do think you can get away with that in slashers if you have a main group of characters and there just happens to be one random survivor from that group. My main issue with this film, and it's something that I can't think of any other slashers that have done this. There might be ones out there. I don't know them personally, as with an issue I thought I had with some of the films we'll talk about later, that issue ended up not being an issue. The more I thought about it, it just stuck out to me more in the Terrifier films. But when you think about it, they're not really that big of an issue. Whereas with this one, I still can't think of a slasher film, a generic slasher film that has done this. And that is the villain wins. Or at least there's no real survival, or there's no story of survival. And I know technically there's a survivor, but not really when you actually think about it with how badly maimed they are and everything. There just really isn't that story. And doing what they teased in the first scene, they could have done something more along the lines of a descent into madness thing for the survival story, but they didn't even do that really. And that's why, to me, as a proof of concept, it works really well to show you how great of a villain Art the Clown can be. But the issue is, it does just feel like a simulated snuff film rather than a slasher film to me. And that's just not what I want from my slashers. I'm a big fan of villains winning and a big proponent of villains winning in movies, just not generic slashers. In psychological horror, it can work. In other forms of horror, it can work. In action movies, comic book movies, it can work. Just not in generic slashers. And next we have All Hallows Eve. In all honesty, I would give this the same rating as the first Terrifier, all things put together. There's one reason why I did not put this in last place, and that is maybe my favorite just scene in Art the Clown history might be the last 10-15 minutes of All Hallows Eve. You know, you've seen all three of the shorts, and you go back, spoiler alert, to the babysitter watching the Art the Clown Terrifier, the original Terrifier short. And it just does sort of Art the Clown kind of turns into the girl from The Ring, and you have him in the television and all of that. I just found that very great, and I loved it. It made Art the Clown just even more terrifying to me. Just the potential of him. Obviously, it's fiction. He's not going to jump out of my screen in my living room, but just the idea of that, I love it so much. And then one of the things I mentioned previously is sort of at the end when you have kids, quote unquote, I mean, not quote unquote, they do, they get beheaded. And at first I was like, that might be a little too far for me. But then when I thought about it, it's really not, because you have the movie It, you have Chucky trying to kill kids in every movie, and it's not really, the whole grand scheme of things, it's not really too far. It's just for some reason it sticks out more. And once I got past that, I still genuinely loved this and loved the later movies as well, obviously. In terms of the movie as a whole, outside of just those last 10-15 minutes or so, it's okay. It kind of just feels like a generic Halloween anthology movie. And I kind of like anthology movies, but they're never great movies to me. I've never really seen one that's fully impacted me. They're just nice, throw them on, have a blast type of movies. Not so much, ooh, this is a great movie that I'm going to rewatch all the time, per se. But for what it is, it's a decent enough, one of the better Halloween anthology movies, especially the first short, the last short, even though I think both of them still kind of fall into the whole simulated snuff thing, no survival thing. Shorts can sometimes get away with that. But then there's the middle one I really did not like at all with the alien. I just did not like it. Story-wise, I thought it was great, but the design of the alien was terrible, in my opinion. I think they pulled it off well, just if it was a sci-fi movie. But because it was a horror movie, I didn't like the design. But like I said, that last 10-15 minutes puts this way ahead of the first Terrifier. Now that we got those two out of the way, there is a huge gap, a huge jump in my love of these movies right here. Because those first two, they were like great proof of concept, you know, great at showcasing that Art the Clown can be a great villain. It was kind of like Art the Clown is a great character that didn't have a great movie. And then Terrifier 2 came out, Terrifier 3 came out, and now that discussion's over, in my opinion. He does have two amazingly just great movies that are very hard to pick apart for me, but I still have my favorite. Now in second place, we have Terrifier 2. I do genuinely love this movie. I love the homage to classic slashers, especially like this feels very much like an homage to A Nightmare on Elm Street, which is my second favorite horror franchise. And for most of my life, it was my favorite until I went to college and discovered this guy's family. Not Palpatine, no, this guy. And discovered his family. But for the most part, A Nightmare on Elm Street for most of my life was actually my favorite horror franchise. And now it's still my second favorite horror franchise. I love Elm Street. I need to stop talking about that. This movie, Terrifier 2, definitely feels like an homage to Elm Street when you have like that school sequence, you know, and he sees Art the Clown in the hallway and he gets a possum thrown at him, how that kind of parallels to Freddy Krueger in the school hallways. And outside of that, you have the Clown Cafe, like Dreams, which obviously dreams and dream sequences harken back to Elm Street. Now, one thing that does set this apart from the movie that we'll talk about next is I don't think the acting is quite as crisp. I think the story is just as good and just as well written. I just don't think the acting is quite as crisp. I do think there's one kill scene in particular I didn't think looked as well in terms of the practical effects, and that's the one that takes place in the Halloween store with the cashier clerk. I don't think that really looked that well to me, as well as every other kill in this franchise. But outside of that, I really think the only thing that kind of lowers this, I do think, is when you get to that third act, I do think it starts to drag a little bit. Not enough that it ruins the movie, but enough that it kind of doesn't quite hit that same level as the third one for me. I still think it's an amazing movie, and I do think Sienna Shaw in this film might be my favorite final girl ever. I think she is amazing, and she just comes off as sort of this nerdy badass. You know, she practically builds like a cosplayer does, builds her own costume. I know technically it's a Halloween costume, it's not a cosplay, but it's just kind of like this nerdy badass that just steps up, saves her brother, beheads Art the Clown. It's just really well done, well written. I think Sienna Shaw was a great final girl, and I do think she was slightly better in the second one than the third one. But like I said, I do think the third one is just slightly better of a movie. So that brings us to Terrifier 3, the most recent one, and the only one that does not take place on Halloween. No. This one takes place on my favorite holiday, Christmas, which I think Christmas brings a great aesthetic for a horror movie. The bright Christmas lights in contrast to like a dark horror story, I think provides a lot of aesthetic. And just Art the Clown dressed as Santa Claus and his interactions with Santa Claus. And then when he's in the mall, it starts off as like this playful thing of him just like, oh my gosh, it's the North Pole. Oh, it's so fun and great. And then it gets disturbing when you have all of those children running up to him. It's Santa Claus, mommy. And so it's so good at just going from playful to disturbing while still Art the Clown thinks it's playful, and which just makes it even more disturbing. And I think they do an amazing job with that and just cranking up the horror. In even when it's not gory, it's still cranking up the horror in terms of a disturbing feeling. And in terms of playing homage to classic slashers in twisted ways, the way they play homage to Black Christmas with Art the Clown in the chair, looking out the window, while Vicky, like, I guess, commits, even though she doesn't because she can't really die. And then that leads to another weird sexual scene. Yeah. That felt a little odd, but it made sense, I guess, within the thing. It didn't take me out of the film, so it wasn't necessarily a real criticism. It's just something odd. Overall, I just really love how they build up the lore in this film, and I love the battle that Sienna goes through. I still think Sienna's story from the second one is still slightly better in terms of her character's story arc, even though I think the story of the film as a whole is slightly better here. One criticism is the podcast character. She's kind of annoying and just feels very one-dimensional. And then the thing that really separates it from the second one, outside of the Christmas aesthetic, is it never feels like it drags out. It feels like it's the perfect length. I do think it's got kill scenes that are magnificent. It doesn't have like one that sticks out like Terrifier 2. Kind of had that one kill scene that just kind of stuck out in terms of the practical effects, in my opinion. This one, you didn't get any of that. And you get a giant chainsaw scene, which I'm a big fan of, chainsaw kills. And then you even get some kills that I don't think this is what the director was going for. But as someone who's also a big fan of the Fast and Furious franchise and grew up with Too Fast, Too Furious, when you get that scene with the rats and the heat, I kind of like that. It's like a weird way of doing the Too Fast, Too Furious interrogation scene with rats, but doing it in like a slasher film. And it also just it felt like a Saw trap in a weird way. This film, Terrifier 3, it kind of blew me away. I wasn't expecting to like it this much after seeing the previous films. Because Terrifier 2, I loved it, but I wasn't fully sold on the franchise yet. This one sells me on the franchise. I was sold on Art the Clown. I was sold on the second one. This one sells me on the franchise. I love it, and that's why it's my favorite. So those are my opinions on the Art the Clown films and the Terrifier franchise. Tell me yours in the comment section down below. Hit the like button if you like myself, Papa John. And whatever, subscribe if you like talking about movies that other people might not be so keen on. They might hate, controversy sells, whatever, who cares. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe, comment, do whatever you want. I don't care, hit the dislike. I've been Papa John. I've been battling a cold today. I hope I powered through it well. And always, keep it hot, like Papa John. Sexy motherfucker. Terrifier. I'm a fucking crazy nut job, that's what I am.